On this glorious day, I declare Nintendo has once again dominated the competition. And not in an insignificant way either. This is a game changer. This is the moment where the weird conspiracy theory driven nonsense that was the anti-Pokemon agenda just completely blows up and explodes. Right? It's over. It's never going to recover from this. Because your hero, your champion, your legend, your god, Pocketpair, is now being sued by Nintendo. Exactly how I said it would. And if anything, it's actually worse now that it's actually happening. Now that we're actually seeing it happen live, seeing the Pal Bros just cope and seed. They're crying. They're trying to desperately just rein in the control, right? They're trying to convince you that this isn't about the designs. Like, Nintendo is just scared of Palworld, and they're sending out these frivolous lawsuits trying to take them out. But the reality is significantly different, right? Pocketpair did plagiarize Pokemon. They did plagiarize those designs. They plagiarized certain mechanics. And over the next year or so, Nintendo is going to prove it. And they're going to prove it so thoroughly that Pocketpair is going to be driven out of the industry, embarrassing anyone who tried to shill for them. I'm looking at you, Verlicify, Angry Joe, Raging Golden Eagle, Jeff Keighley, just to name a few. How many people religiously came out, people who don't play Pokemon, people who don't know anything about Pokemon, who don't like Nintendo, who don't play Nintendo Switch, how many people came out trying to tell us that Pokemon's bad, it's a bad IP, I don't know anything about it, but I hate Pokemon. And that's why Palworld should succeed, even though objectively it's not as good. It has no replay value, it has no content, it's not an innovative idea, and it's not even finished. Palworld never left early access. And so we've waited for the past, several months. We saw Palworld, we saw that forced AstroTurf campaign. We saw that, 2-week period of relevancy. We saw everybody damage controlling it. Assure us all, over and over and over again, that it would never be sued by Nintendo. There are people who claim to be lawyers who made that statement, actually, which goes to show you should never, ever listen to a lawyer on YouTube, ever, right? So those guys have been like BTFO, and now like we're in the next stage of the Cope cycle, right? Up until just now, the narrative was that Palworld would never be sued. They were in the clear. They were bigger than Pokemon. That Nintendo was on the way out. They wouldn't be able to compete with this knockoff IP from an indie developer, right? It was over. Like, we've seen this pattern before, okay? Temtem, Yokai Watch, Digimon back in the day, right? Like every single time it's the same song and dance, right? Like, people will get tired of Pokemon. They'll stop playing Pokemon. They'll play something else. Like, they'll grow up. There's a fucking South Park episode about that. Like, the kids are gonna get bored of Pokemon. Well, guess what? We didn't. It did not happen. It never will happen. Like, Pokemon is the biggest brand in the world. Bigger than Star Wars ever was, and far more high quality. Like, you can't tell me with a straight face that Star Wars is more iconic than Pokemon at this point. Let's be real here. Pokemon has never had a severe drop in quality. They've had consistent releases every 3 years since its inception, right? They have better merchandise, better, more recognizable characters, right? Better spin-off material, right? What does Star Wars have? Like, special effects, like, fuck Star Wars, okay? Like, I don't know what, like, the other top 10 brands are, but, like, fuck them, too, okay? Like, let's just make this clear here. Like, let's make this crystal clear here for a second. Pokemon is the best there is for a reason. Like, there's a reason people like this game so much. And no, it isn't because of nostalgia. Otherwise, like, how exactly did Pokemania happen? Like, we were nostalgic for something that just happened. Like, I've never heard of Pokemon before, but I'm going to buy and play these games and watch the show for no reason. Like, no. Absolutely not. Pokemon is an absolute banger of an IP. And yet, every generation, we have to deal with these degenerates who come in and are just like, Pokemon's not as good as it used to be. Like, back in the day we used to call them Gen 1ers, but now it's been going on so long, you legit see people doing the same thing for Gen 5 now. Like, when people say that Pokemon stopped being good 10 years ago, they mean when, like, X and Y came out. So what they're saying is that Black and White was the last good Pokemon game. Like, I love Black and White. It's my favorite gen. But, like, I remember what that was like when it came out. I remember what people were saying. I remember how, like, everybody was raging about how terrible it was. And, like, there was no Kanto representation, right? I remember people bitching about, like, all the new monsters, all the new Pokemon, and, like, some of the design decisions they made. It doesn't feel like Pokemon anymore. Like, they were doing the same thing you're doing now. Basically. I cannot stress this enough when it comes to the narrative that, like, Pokemon fell off with Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet. Like, I remember when people were saying the same thing about Gens 3 and 4. Like, so, like, again, we all know how this ends. Like, this is the important thing to understand, is that 10, 15 years from now, you're going to see people saying that, like, Scarlet and Violet were the peak of Pokemon. There is no denying that Scarlet and Violet, like, really innovated and really brought their A game and really had, like, a fantastic story, a world, like, characters. Carmine is, like, probably one of my favorite Pokemon characters ever now. Right? So, like, when you really take that into consideration, like, we all know how this ends, right? Just like how eventually the Gen 1ers were mocked and derided for their insane narratives in regard to the declining quality of Pokemon, right? I remember reading blog posts about people, like, who would seriously write essays about how, like, everything after Gen 1 was not a real Pokemon, right? Like, I would remember that, right? Like, again, it got so outlandish and it got so ridiculous that nobody could take it seriously anymore, right? That was how the Gen 1 narrative died, right? Like, it was a slow, gradual, painful death, but eventually people began to respect the fact that Pokemon had not fallen off after Gen 1. And now we're going through the same thing again with Gen 5, where people are unwilling to admit that modern Pokemon is not only a good franchise, in a lot of ways it's better than it ever was, but there are a lot of people who desperately are fighting against it, right? They'll do anything they can. They'll prop up any mediocre franchise. They'll weaponize anything they'll say and do anything to convince you that Pokemon is bad now. And that has led to the environment in which Palworld, a complete nothing burger of a product, got any relevancy whatsoever, right? You know, early this year, when this thing was coming out and people were calling it the next big thing, it was very evident even then that the only thing that made this game relevant at all was because of the obvious Pokemon plagiarism, right? Like, take away the Pokemon comparisons, and Palworld has absolutely nothing. Like, I can assure you that, like, look, when do we talk about Palworld? Only in association with Pokemon, right? Palworld was completely forgotten about up until now, right? When Nintendo, like, formally announced a lawsuit that we all knew was coming, right? The reason for Palworld's popularity, the core of it, is simply to devalue the Pokemon IP. It is a desperate attempt by a corrupt gaming public, right, to try and grift and try to, like, take advantage of disenfranchised Pokemon fans who can't acknowledge the fact that they've grown out of the target demographic for Pokemon, right? So that's why Palworld is so try-hard and edgy, right? With the guns and the slavery and just, like, the excessive violence, like, it's all doing things that are cool and mature, like appealing to, like, real gamers and not those kids who still play normal Pokemon, right? Like, it's a complete joke, right? Palworld has just completely fallen off the map. It's become irrelevant. I believe the developers even released a statement recently that they were, like, running out of money and that they were considering, like, new monetization practices, right? Like, and now this news drops, right? Out of nowhere, Nintendo decides to body slam Palworld into the pavement, like, so hard that it's just never ever going to recover. Like, anybody who seriously is in denial about this, right, that Palworld 100% is going to lose this lawsuit, like, really needs to just have their gamer card revoked, right? Like, real talk, if you ever simped for Palworld at all, for any reason, like, no Pokemon fan should ever listen to or respect you ever again, right? Because this was really self-evident right from the get-go, right? You have so many people, like, in denial about the fact that the designs for the pals were obviously plagiarized from Pokemon, right? You know it's bad when you can, like, look at a pal and, like, immediately realize that, like, oh yeah, that's Mega Mewtwo Y, or that's a Vulpix, or that's a Lapras, right? You know, that's a Salazzle, right? You know, like, you look at all these pals that are just, like, weird, like, twisted, perverse versions of Pokemon, and, like, you honestly don't know how the developers could seriously have thought that this would have gone over well with fans, right? And again, the Palworld audience continues to do this weird thing where they sit there and try to gaslight you into thinking that the designs aren't plagiarized. It's like one of their, like, go-to things, right, is that they seriously will, like, try and tell you with a straight face that, like, this is not derivative of Pokemon, even though it was, like, all over the marketing, even though designs are, like, are one-to-one comparisons, right? The assets are clearly ripped. Like, again, the whole AI story. This is another thing about that Palworld that gets me, is how often people fall for obvious bullshit, right? Like, the AI story, right? Because that was what people tried to come up with initially, like, oh, they generated these things with AI. No, these are straight up copies of Pokemon designs, right? Like maybe like one or two assets are like flipped or like rearranged, but like for the most part they're like one to one, like straight up ripped from Pokemon Legends Arceus, right? Like it's not it's it's very observable just how similar they are. But people tried to like come up with this weird narrative that like, oh, it's AI, but when that was like disproven, or I think more likely people just kind of like rolled their eyes at it. Like people use this as like a weird thing, like, oh, all the narratives that Pokemon fans have lobbied at Palworld have failed. None of them are true at all, right? Palworld is the greatest. It's so original and creative, even though it rips off all of these Pokemon games. It was disgusting, right? Like I honestly think that that image of like the Dragon Quest monsters lined up against the Pokemon is like the single most like low IQ thing I've ever seen in my life. Like it is so bad that not only does it debunk their own arguments, they pretend that it's like some epic win, right? And they all do this, right? Where they all post that image of all the Dragon Quest monsters, and like they compare them to Pokemon, like, oh, Pokemon plagiarized Dragon Quest. No, like the way you recruit Pokemon, the way you catch Pokemon is completely different than the way you recruit monsters in DQM or Dragon Quest V, right? Like it works differently. The layout is different. Like the structure is different, right? They aren't the same thing at all. Compared to Palworld, which like straight up rips off like Pokemon Legends Arceus when it comes to like the traversal mechanics and like the catching stuff, and it's really noticeable if you've played like Legends Arceus. To me, it's I don't understand how anybody could make that comparison unless you weren't familiar with Dragon Quest or Pokemon at all. And that's what I have been noticing. You know, like Angry Joe was a big advocate for that. Like, oh, look at this. Like, Pokemon ripped off Dragon Quest. Like, no, no, they didn't. Like, it's not the same thing at all. And like, again, I'll give you another example, a more recent example. Astrobot, right? You know, I've been coming out saying that, like, you know, Astrobot is like a ripoff of Mario. It's the same thing. It's not as good, yada, yada, yada. I did not say it was a straight up plagiarism, though, right? Not a single person has said that. Like, no one has ever said that Astrobot is a straight up reskin of Mario. Why? Because it's clearly not, right? Because it does have its unique ideas. It does have its character. It does have, like, a different looking aesthetic. Like, it's different enough, right? The similarities are just that, like, they're both platformers, right? So, like, it's not straight up plagiarism the way that Palworld is. And the fact that, like, nobody has seriously, like, considered throwing a plagiarism accusations at Astrobot is really telling, right? Because this is a really good example of how people react to a product that's similar, but is original enough where it can't be straight up, like, considered plagiarism, right? So, like, I'll laugh at Astrobot. I'll laugh at its fans for thinking it's like some creative, new, innovative thing, right? When it's basically just a weird mash of like Mario Sunshine and Mario Galaxy, right? Like I can do that. Like I'll do that. But I didn't come out and accuse the developers of straight up plagiarism like I did with Palworld, because it's not. Like at its core, like Astrobot is a completely original new video game, right? It isn't a knockoff, a straight up copy and paste job like Palworld was. And like the issue is that the Palworld audience consistently refuses to acknowledge like this issue, right? They do everything they possibly can to just ignore the similar mechanics, ignore the concept, ignore like how the marketing, ignore like the similarities between like the characters and the pals, right? You know, ignore everything that Palworld blatantly ripped off from Pokemon in order to create this like narrative that like this is some innovative thing, while still simultaneously doing this thing where they pretend that Palworld is a better version of Pokemon, right? Like again, it's not the same thing at all, bro, but it's totally better. Like again, it's such like double speak, right? If you read like 1984 and you know how like social communists talk, right? About how they talk about like equality while they're like oppressing you and stuff like that. It's the same kind of behavior, right? Because these people aren't interested in playing good, interesting video games. They're interested in seeing Nintendo fail, which is been a pretty consistent thing for the past like 30 years, but it's gotten more and more blatant over time. Like they're getting more and more brazen about it. And this is like I think probably the most egregious example I've seen in years. Like I'm being completely honest with you, I don't think anything this bad has happened to like a Nintendo product since like man, I don't know, since the Wii U reveal maybe, where they somehow like gaslit an entire generation of people into thinking that like the console was like an upgraded re-release, that like the tablet was an accessory or something, right? Like they somehow tricked people into thinking the Wii U was a worse name than the Xbox One, right? Like again, I can't think of anything that had like such a weird astronomical push behind it, and to try and devalue a Nintendo product, right? Like I can't think of anything that's been hit this hard. Not like Mario Wonder, not Tears of the Kingdom, not ARMS, like nothing. Like nothing in recent memory. Like the weird narrative against Pokemon. And I can't emphasize this enough. This really does come off as completely fake, right? Because the news drops immediately, right? Nintendo releases their statement like, "Oh yeah, we're suing Palworld because of copyright infringements. Yeah, yeah, they violated some of our patents. We want an injunction against them, right? They're going to try and stop Palworld from being distributed, right? So like they released a statement, and before they did this at like about 9 p.m. last night, right? Oh, 8 p.m. Like I got the news, like Discord notified me, someone on Discord, and like I read up on it, and I noticed within an hour that the Pal shills had already like settled on a narrative, right? They had already settled on like a claim. Like, oh, they're not suing because of the plagiarism. They're suing because of patents. They're suing for related issues relating other than to the copyrights and trademarks, which means that Palworld did nothing wrong. Nintendo is just scared of them. Like they really want to push this angle is that Palworld did so well that Nintendo is scared of them. That they're worried that they're going to lose their market share to a bunch of weirdos like living across the street. Like they really think that like what Palworld did was like impressive. Right? Like it's so delusional. But like the thing that really gets me about it is that like how fake it comes off, right? Like again, why exactly do these people feel, why do they all have the same talking points? Why are they everywhere? Why are there so few Pokemon fans in comparison? Because I saw like there were Pokemon threads like up on VP like right when this was happening. Like I saw like Pokemon fans actually talk about upcoming Pokemon projects, Pokemon ZA. Like and again, you see like the weird disconnect between Pal Bros, Pal Cucks, I'm calling them. Pal Cucks and Pokemon fans. Pal Cucks like constantly obsess over Pokemon, shit on it, constantly pretend like Palworld was better than it, that Nintendo will never ever sue them for plagiarism, right? They do all this thing. Like their entire universe, their community entirely revolves around downplaying Pokemon. And then you go on like a Pokemon board, and then you look at like some random thread, and you're just like, you're seeing people say things like, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to Pokemon Legends ZA," like, or like they're talking about like Gen 4 or 5 or whatever, right? Like, they're talking like actual gameplay. And this is the thing about like about Palworld that really needs to be said is that when have you ever heard anyone talk about the game itself, right? Whenever you see people talk about Palworld, it's always in regards to like Nintendo not suing it, about how well it's sold, about how it's better than Pokemon, right? You never see people like sit down and say like, oh, I spent like an hour playing Palworld today. Like I raised this I don't know this Vulpix looking thing. Like when have you ever seen someone talk about that? Like again, because there's nothing much to do in Palworld besides like do the raids and just get every pal there is. Like, and again, like the expansions that they've put out have not been substantial, have not added a lot to the game, and have not revitalized it. Right? It's this is just like again, I've said this over and over again, but like the game felt forced. It felt fake. You know, it felt like a lot like what's happening with Astrobot right now, where like all these YouTubers are coming out to praise it just because it's not a Nintendo game, right? We keep seeing this over and over and over again, and I can't emphasize this enough. When have you ever seen a Nintendo game have this kind of obsessive like audience, right? It just doesn't happen. Like we don't shit on like other products like incessantly the way that like Palworld fans do. And so anyway, I've been going for half an hour. Let's look at the see. Harman Smith was right about Palworld. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So like, yeah, that's another thing that needs to be addressed is that like I don't know how many other YouTubers were coming out and like addressing the reality of the situation, right? Because everyone I know was like shilling for Palworld. You know, Arlo didn't, the Mish didn't, Verlicify didn't. Like again, everybody I know was shilling for Palworld, and I was the only person who brought up the fact that the game was obviously plagiarized, that Nintendo did have a right to sue them, that it was going to end badly for Pocketpair, and what happened? Like, I was met with a wave of people, like, uploading, like, Nintendo will never sue Palworld videos, right? Like that ridiculous video game story time video that I posted on my community tab, right? You know, I saw this stuff when it was coming out, right? I saw people downplaying the obvious, and like it ended up blowing up in their faces, right? So not only was I right, everyone else was wrong, right? Not a single person, you know, really stopped and thought that like, well, maybe Nintendo could come after them for something. It was always just this unilateral, just like, no, they can't prove those designs were stolen, man. Like, and it wouldn't matter if they did. Like, they really convinced themselves that Palworld had gotten one up over Nintendo. But like that wasn't true at all. You know, like when I see what the Pokemon community is like right now, when I see how enthusiastic people are for Scarlet and Violet and Legends Arceus and like Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, when I see like, you know, how hyped I am for Pokemon Legends ZA. I just talked about that recently actually. I talked about like games coming out in 2025 I'm really looking forward to, and I brought that up, right? When I think about like the current state of like the Pokemon franchise, like, you know, it's nothing but like really positive experiences, right? Like nobody really has anything bad to say about Pokemon. Like everything you see in regards to this the anti-Pokemon like agenda, like it's all just a big cope, right? None of it is real. Like all of it is just really forced among the community, right? They do everything they possibly can to just ignore like the reality of situations, right? Again, the fact that like people genuinely thought that like Nintendo releasing a statement about Palworld was like an admission of defeat was like absurd to me, right? Like I am not surprised at all that Nintendo is going after Palworld. Like it doesn't surprise me at all. I actually had like several videos where I was like alluding to that relatively recently, I think, where I was talking about how Palworld was going to get taken out, like there was going to be a lawsuit, and Nintendo would systematically destroy this company. Like I told you, this would happen, and just like with the Yuzu emulator, like people delusionally tried to say that like no, it's never going to happen, Nintendo can't do it, and like they went ahead and did it, right? And it's going to end the same way, right? Yuzu cucked within 2 days, right? Like, and I think Palworld is in a position where like they're going to be even more fucked, right? Like, again, it's going to be really, really interesting seeing this happen, right? Seeing this play out. And I do think this is going to be like a big blow against the narrative, right? Like the big thing I'm seeing right now is that people are like trying to twist the story so that Nintendo is the bad guy in all this, that they're abusing their financial situation to oppress the poor indie developer. But like the reality is, and I think most people will agree with me, is that like Power World deserves everything bad that happens to them, right? You are enabling the absolute worst kind of shovelware mobile tier developer imaginable, right? Someone who steals assets, someone who take advantages of other people's brands, right? Like this is something that would have gotten laughed at if it was any other developer, but because it was Nintendo, because it was Game Freak, like you thought you could celebrate it. You thought you could worship it. You thought you could paint this as some glorious savior of gaming and not just like the slop that it was, right? Like to me, like Palworld is the absolute worst thing that's happened this generation. Like purely because of just how adamant people were about it being a failure. Like Palworld, I think, is a bigger failure than Concord because Sony's going to recover from this, right? The developers are going to get new jobs. Like Concord isn't as big of a disaster as Palworld, right? Because I think there's going to be criminal charges for this. Like I think people involved are going to take massive, massive L's, right? Pocketpair is going to straight up just go bust because of this. Sony's going to be implicated because of that deal they signed. Microsoft might get brought into it. I really hope that Jeff Keighley, this exposes Jeff Keighley, because one of the things I noticed like early on was just how much like Jeff was shilling this game. Like, oh, Power World's so good, guys. Like this small Japanese studio. Like he was the one who was behind a lot of like the narratives in regards to the game. Pushing the lie that it sold really well, that it was a really innovative game, that it did not plagiarize Pokemon. Like, if Jeff Keighley has to go on stage during the Game Awards and start talking about Power World, that's going to be a massive L for him, especially as like more and more information comes out in regards to this and how like he propped up a plagiarized product. Like they were calling it Game of the Year. Like this isn't going to end well for them, right? Either they ignore the game and ignore like one of the biggest releases of the year, or they talk about it and admit it was a knockoff of a Nintendo product, right? There's no winning for them. Like I think this is going to be a big blow against his credibility, right? Just like shilling the PS5 Pro, like it's just exposing the masses to who Jeff Keighley really is. He is a corporate cocksucker. He isn't a gamer. He doesn't know anything about these corporations. Like he just does what he's told and shills the products at his award show, right? Like he's scum. And again, not that I'm gonna watch the Game Awards, but like I'm really, really interested in seeing just how they handle this, because I think this is going to be a big L for them. Like absolutely. Yeah, like people aren't denying. Yeah, people are like backtracking on the Power World Warship. I'm sure, right? I'm sure there are a lot of people who um, shilled for Power World because it was bad for Nintendo without thinking about the implications. So they're gonna try to backtrack, and they're gonna try and distance themselves from it. But I do think we do need to like call these people out. I'm looking specifically at people like Angry Joe and like Justin Diems and like people like that. Like you cannot take these people seriously. Like absolutely not. Hmm. Let's see. Was there anything else I needed to talk about? Um, yeah. So a lot of the patents that Nintendo is talking about in regards to Palworld are directly associated with Pokemon. So, like, the way it looks to me is that they're going to prove that Palworld plagiarized Pokemon by emphasizing that they have a lot of patents related to it that Palworld specifically ripped off. So you gotta understand they're not like doing this for gamers. They're doing this for boomer judges, right? They're doing it for like the legal system. So they have to like really go into depth about like what was stolen, what was done, like how it all works and why it's a big deal. And like there really is no way that Pocketpair gets off on this. Oh yeah, I haven't talked about this. Yeah, 100% certain Palworld will lose. Okay, there's a no-win situation for them, right? They're not going to get out of this unscathed. They're not going to have a major hit on their hands. They're not going to recover from this. They're not going to be able to pay their legal bills, most probably. Like they are going to be like working alongside Gary Bowser in like the Nintendo like slave mines, like or whatever, like to like all of their wages garnished to go to Nintendo, right? Like for the rest of their lives. Like it's going to be the same thing, right? Like these criminals, and this is really important. These criminals are going up against Nintendo, right? The anti-Nintendo industry is so desperate they have to prop up literal criminals in order to stay relevant, right? We saw this with Yuzu, we saw this with Gary Bowser, we're seeing it now with Palworld, right? This is Nintendo's competition. People who are committing crimes in order to compete with them. And we also know Sony does this as well, considering like how they pretend the PS2 sold way more than it actually did. How they're faking sales numbers in general. How they like conduct themselves, doing backroom deals that they aren't supposed to do. But like again, like this is just another example, right? Like again, we are slowly working our way to destroying like the entire industry, right? Everything bad about it, everything that propped up game journals and Sony, like it's all going bye-bye, right? Like this is just the next major step, right? Like Power World didn't even last 2 weeks. Not only did it not last, you guys shilled for a product that Nintendo is going to get the money for, right? They're gonna have to. Nintendo is looking for damages for this, and they are going to get it because I think the damages to the Pokemon brand are very self-evident with how you acted and how you conducted yourselves, right? Like again, Palworld's entire existence was to devalue the Pokemon brand, and I think that's very observable by simply looking at the community. It isn't a competing product. It's a plagiarized product, right? They stole assets and mechanics from Pokemon, right? They did not make their own competing competitive property, right? They just ripped off Nintendo and then refused to and then like try to get away with it. Again, you won't hear me say that like Dragon Quest Monsters deserve to be canceled, right? You don't see me complaining about Shin Megami Tensei or any of those things, right? Like again, those games are very different from Pokemon, right? It goes back to that Dragon Quest thing again. Like if Pokemon did rip off, plagiarize Dragon Quest, why didn't Dragon Quest come after them? Could it be that Pokemon is not plagiarized? Like again, like your attempts at trying to make Nintendo look like the bad guy are going to completely and abjectly fail, right? Like this is the big thing that really gets me about this is that I do think this is going to be the end of the narrative that Nintendo abuses the court system, right? Nobody on the outside looking in is going to look at this situation and think Nintendo did anything wrong, right? You can cry all you want about like Nintendo should make better games, but like you wouldn't support them if they did. right? Like they're making better games now and you don't care, right? Like you celebrate any opportunity you get to attack Nintendo, right? Look at what happened with Tears of the Kingdom. Like, look at what happened with Baldur's Gate 3. Like, Mario Wonder, right? Fire Emblem Engage. Like, how many times Splatoon 3, No More Heroes 3, Bayonetta 3. Like, look at all these games that were hated among the community for petty reasons, purely because they were Nintendo games. That's the only reason. Like, nothing else really amounts to, like, why these games were reviled. It's because they were Nintendo exclusives, right? Pokemon does have competition though, right? The reason it excels so much is because it's better than the competition, right? Call of Duty is not the only FPS on the market, but it's the one that's the dominant in its sphere because it appeals the most to the audience, right? Like Pokemon's the same way, right? Nintendo has never gone after Pokemon competitors ever, right? If anything, they enabled them. Like just look at like how heavily they promoted Yokai Watch when it came to America, right? Like look at that. That was supposed to be the Pokemon killer, and here Nintendo America is like doing skits, promoting it, right? Like again, the reality is really different than what you make it out to be. Didn't Sony invest in the Palworld company? Yeah, they partnered with them. Yeah, like I brought that up like offhand. Sony's it was like going to produce like an anime series with them or something with like Aniplex. So like yeah, Sony might be implicated in this situation. So like I think Palworld signed that deal thinking that like Sony would protect them from Nintendo, and I don't think that's gonna happen. I think Sony's gonna want to get like really far away from this when it happens. Because there is no defending it. Like, none. Like, the only thing I could think. Okay, there are two ways that Nintendo could, like, lose this lawsuit. And only two, right? First, if they hire Nick Rekieta. Like, if they hire Nick Rekieta, like, Nintendo's doomed. Like, the entire company just goes bankrupt in, like, 5 hours. Like, they're done. Secondly, is if the Japanese court system is so biased towards Sony, they allow them to get away with it, right? Like again, that's yeah. Harman literally cites sources, and then Dum Dums cry that he doesn't cite sources. I know, right? Like I'm telling you names and dates and like people, and like everybody just cries like cite your sources. Like no, like the typical liberal response, like cite your sources, bro. Like if I cited everything I said, you would just try and like discredit the source, right? Like again, this happens every single time. But anyway, what was I getting at? Yeah. So, Sony has an insane amount of control over the Japanese government, right? So, assuming that they're behind the shilling for Palworld, which is very possible, because I really don't think Pocketpair has the resources to AstroTurf the way they have been. Like it seems almost like a bigger corporation is behind it. So assuming Sony is like involved in this, like I think the best thing they could do is just I think Sony might like it's possible that they might influence like the court decision. Like maybe. Like I don't think it's impossible at all for that to happen. For like Sony to get involved and that for them to like try and devalue the Pokemon brand. Like I do think that like they have to have like some kind of hand in this. Like again, that's the only thing I can think of is like how Nintendo could fail is if like Sony like involves itself and leverages like its influence over the courts to fuck over Nintendo. But like I don't see them doing that. I just don't. Like again, like Sony has to operate in absolute secrecy, right? Like they can do something like that, but like the more they like throw their weight around, the more people like me will notice and start calling it out, and then like they lose all their influence, right? Again, it's been happening like for a long time in regards to them. right? Their control over the industry has been like lessening in recent years. So like I just don't see that happening now, honestly. But yeah, I think Nintendo is definitely gonna win though, or at least they think they're gonna win, right? Because they took a while to the build their case. They went after Palworld at a critical juncture, right? Palworld is not prepared for this. Like they released a statement about how like they were only just notified that they were being sued, which come on, they can't be that stupid. Like again, this drives me nuts about Palworld is how like they put on this image of being the nice, friendly like Japanese indie devs when they're like sleazy as fuck. Like I can't stand those fake stories they put out. Like in regards like, oh, we don't have guns in Japan. So we happened to hire a guy who worked at a convenience store who knew about guns, and it was such a crazy thing. Like I hate that bullshit. It's so fake and transparent. Uh, but yeah, like um I think like Nintendo has the overwhelming advantage. Like from a pure legal standing, like Nintendo absolutely has like everything they need to win, right? Everything. So like the question is like what exactly are they gonna go after Palworld for? Because I've seen some dispute about that because they specifically mentioned like patents in in their initial like announcement. So people like twisted that to mean something it didn't. Like they were talking about like, oh, they're gonna try and go after Palworld because you press the A button to do something. But like I think they have like patents related to like the Pokemon branding, right? So they have like unique mechanics that are patented that Palworld violated because like it's a blatant knockoff of Pokemon. So I think the purpose of this is to like demonstrate like the similarities between Palworld and Pokemon, and then like dismantling the IP like because of that. Like again, people are delusional if they think like the claims are baseless. Like that's the big thing. Like people are seriously coping about this right now. Like yeah, I've said this before, but like uh, back during the like it's never gonna happen days, but like now we've moved on to the point where people are saying that like, oh, it's happening, but Nintendo's never gonna win, and that's gonna be that's gonna be like BTFO really really quickly, right? Like it's only a matter of time until we start seeing like how things look and like what Power World's defense for this is gonna be, because like they have no defense for it personally. Like I think it's safe to say, and I think more poignantly, they don't have the ability to compete with Nintendo in uh, legal wise. Like they don't have the staff, they don't have like the legal team, they don't have the funds for it, right? Like they're going to seriously go up against Nintendo with like the scraps that they made during Power World's brief period of relevancy, which let's be real has probably already been like burn away in like a fire somewhere. Like it's they don't have that money, and like what little they have left is going to be used up very quickly in legal fees, right? Like again, legal work is really really expensive. So like Power World is just not going to be able to stand up to Nintendo as like a corporation. Yeah, the cope about this is amazing. Like again, the people who are like in denial that Nintendo is going to win are the same people who are denying that like the lawsuit would happen to begin with, or that there was any plagiarism at all. Like you are going to get thoroughly wrecked as the proceedings go forward. Like, I don't know who you're trying to fool. Like, I really don't. Like, anybody who's like actually being honest with you and is not being a grifter is telling you that Nintendo is going to fuck Palworld in the ass, right? Like, you know how, like, you know, if you ever listen to Mr. Medicare and like you watch that Lindsay Ellis video where like he's talking about the rape rap, like that's what's gonna happen to Palworld. Like, they are going to get straight up raped. They're gonna be like left on the side of the road, like just completely just blown out, like unable to move. Like they can't go anywhere in life. Like, they're just completely finished. Like, they're done. There is no recovery from that, right? Like, they're never going to recreate the success of Palworld, and um they're never going to recreate the success of Palworld, and they can't maintain the audience that they do have because the audience is entirely revolving around the Pokemon IP and like the stupid situation that's in. Nintendo hasn't lost in court before. It's very uncommon, right? This is the same company that came up against Universal and won, like when they were like a very small company. So no, I don't think I I do think Nintendo's gonna win. Like, people cited that like Fire Emblem case because like the Fire Emblem creator left Intelligent Systems to work on a PlayStation 1 RPG like Emblem Saga. So like Nintendo sued him for that, and they did lose. But like, you know, Fire Emblem came back and like became an extremely a more popular title after he went anyway. So like, what did they lose really? Like, again, yeah, Nintendo has lost cases because like everyone does, but like it's not common, and like not when they have like an overwhelming advantage like this. Yeah, like Pal Bros are seething. I saw them seething all night, right? Like, I was on 4chan, I was like looking on Twitter, like I saw like the seething, and like so many people were coping. So many people like refuse to acknowledge like what's happening here and like why it's gonna end badly for Pocketpair no matter what happens. Right? They could win and they're still gonna be fucked because like they're not going to they're not gonna have that fad period ever again. Right? They're never ever gonna recover from that. Like, they're not gonna put out anything else. They're never gonna. I don't think I've said this before, but like I don't think they're going to leave early access. That's something. Yeah, Yuzu in one. Yeah, that's like the big go-to example I've been doing. Like, remember when people said suing Yuzu would be impossible, and then they went ahead and did it in like 2 days, like completely shut it all down and like just put the emulators back in like the bitch bin. Like, they are. Hello, wonderful morning. It is. Holy shit. Like, last night was crazy. Best night I've had in a long time. The case is open and shut. I agree. People getting angry at Nintendo, even though Nintendo's obviously in the right. That's insane. It is. It is insane. It was insane. I've said this before. Like, the Power World audience was only interested in like hating on Nintendo, right? Like, there was no real appeal to Power. Like, the entire purpose was like using the brand to weaponize against Nintendo. And that's why you see like so many people like who never talk about Nintendo like suddenly start talking about Power, right? You know, I saw Clownfish TV do it. I saw Angry Joe do it. I saw like Raging Golden Eagle do it. Like, you know, all these people who have nothing to do with each other were all like forming the the Marvel Ultimate Alliance of like Nintendo hating Spurs, right? You all have like in Power Rangers, like they all have like their little robots that all converge with like one big robot. So like they converged into like the Megazord of Nintendo hate, right? You know, a weapon of pure unadulterated autism. right? Specifically to try and convince us that Palworld was more successful than Pokemon, and that Nintendo was scared of it. Like, just that's another thing that gets me too. Is like this has to be the most delusional cope I've ever seen in my life. The idea that Nintendo is scared of Palworld, like, because this is the thing, because like this is the cope right now, is that like the audience, like, they've convinced themselves that like there was no plagiarism. So like the reason Nintendo is like filing a lawsuit against Palworld is purely out of sheer jealousy. Let's ignore the fact they never tried to go after like companies like Hollow Knight, which also had an audience that was like downplaying like a similar Nintendo properties like Zelda and Metroid, right? Let's ignore the fact that it's like kind of unprecedented for this to happen, right? That they don't make a habit out of like filing lawsuits against random developers for no reason. Let's pretend that Palworld was so successful that Nintendo became jealous and filed a lawsuit against them, like purely so like they don't have to compete with them anymore because they're just too scary. Yuzu folded because Nintendo had overwhelming evidence against them. Yeah, it's going to be the same with Palworld, I think. Like, Palworld is not going to be able to do this. Like, I I do expect this at this point. Palworld is going to take Palworld off of the stores, right? It's going to be refunded. It's not going to be allowed to be sold anymore. Like, that's what Nintendo said in their statement, right? They were looking for an injunction, which means that they were like trying to stop the product from being sold. So, yeah, Palworld is getting removed no matter what. Like, if they settle, the game is getting removed, right? There's just no win condition for Pocketpair in this scenario. Will Nintendo file a lawsuit against Sony for Astrobot? I just talked about this. No, it's not going to happen. Yeah, I've seen people like say that, like, "Oh, you can't sue a game, bro." When I say Palworld, you know what I'm talking about. I don't fucking care about like the legal terminology. Like, I don't want like to know Pocket Pair's name. Okay, like that space I could be using in my head for Peak. Like, why would I care? Like, yeah, so they're getting sued over like multiple patent violations. So like they are being sued for like ripping off like Nintendo's material, right? We don't know exactly what that entails yet, but I think we're gonna learn that very very soon. Yeah, again, people keep saying that like, oh, what did they violate? What did they do? And like, yeah, we're gonna find out soon, right? Like, again, they just announced the lawsuit. They've just formally like done their announcement things. Like Palworld has like released their Coke tweet, like, we didn't do anything wrong, guys. Like, again, we don't know yet, and that doesn't mean that like Palworld did nothing wrong. Is like another thing I'm seeing right now. Is that like, oh, there's no evidence? Yeah, because they're taking it to court. like they're going to lawyers. They don't want to convince Twitter that like Palworld is plagiarized because you guys have no influence. No one respects you. Like, no one will even suck your dick. Okay, like, you are scum. Like, why would Nintendo try to convince you that Palworld is plagiarized? Like, it doesn't matter what you think, right? But they are going after the people who do matter. Right? Like, the people who actually do have the power and the influence to stop like all the nonsense that's been happening over the past several days. It's just the past 8 months. It's been insane. It's an initial like announcement statement, right? That wasn't a legal document. They just gave a statement saying what they were going to do and why they were going to do it, right? The particulars were not in that initial Nintendo announcement. Actually, I haven't read it yet. I actually have it on me. I was gonna read it today. The Harman was right jar. Oh, that's amazing.
Can I post that in my stream? Hang on. Can I post that in the chat? Uh, I don't think I can. No, unfortunately. Uh, okay. What was I doing? Oh yes. Okay. Yeah. Nintendo.co.jp, September 19th, 2024. To whom it may concern, the Pokemon Company, Nintendo Co. Ltd. Filing lawsuit. Yeah. So this is like a 3 paragraph long statement where they just like announce what they're going to do. This is not a formal legal document. It's just them like explaining what they're going to do to the public. Yeah, news release, Japanese. Yep, yep. Nintendo Co. Japan Representative Director and President Shintaro Furukawa, together with the Pokemon Company, filed a patent infringement lawsuit in the Tokyo District Court against Pocketpair Incorporated on September 18th. So it was yesterday. Okay. This lawsuit seeks an injunction against infringement and compensation for damages on the grounds that Palworld, a game development released by the defendant, infringes multiple patent rights. Nintendo will continue to take necessary actions against any infringement of its intellectual properties rights, including the Nintendo brand itself, to protect the intellectual properties it has worked hard to establish over the years. So essentially, they're just explaining that like Palworld has damaged their brand, and they want like compensation for it. And it's going to be really hard to argue against that, considering how people in the chat are acting right now, right? If I was the judge in that case, I would like give Nintendo like the W immediately. Like, yeah, Palworld is cooked. Yeah, they're completely done. Yeah, at one point a Pokemon Rod was going to be made for Palworld, but Nintendo instantly took that down. Yeah, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I haven't thought about that. Yeah. So I think the issue was oh, they did win. Nintendo already shut down another game over patent infringement. Yeah, when did they do that? Like, that's the cope I'm seeing right now is that like the patents have no power. That they're all just like frivolous patents that don't really do anything. Like I know that's a cope, but like I'm not an expert on like Nintendo's patents, so like I don't know what they're going to do with that. So that'll be really interesting if you could like cite a source for that. I haven't heard that if that's true. But yeah, I mean, they have to know what they're doing. Like again, you're talking about like a $1 billion corporation. Like there's 100% no way they're filing a frivolous lawsuit. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Shirinoko project. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean that's the thing about this though, is that nobody should be this stupid to think ripping off Pokemon would have gone well, right? Like again, like what did they think was gonna happen? Were they like emboldened by like the Flappy Birds of the world or something? Like that's kind of the thing I felt for a long time is that like people were getting away with like using Nintendo assets and stuff like that. You know, you hear rap songs with like Mario sound effects and like see pipes everywhere. It's like they really do need to do a better job like stopping that shit. But like yeah, it shouldn't be legal or anything, right? Like but like yeah. Um I do think that like this might be like a major milestone case for Nintendo if they could demonstrate how this kind of stuff like harms their brand. If they could like crack down on like emulators on phones and like those really shitty indie games that reuse their assets and like all that stuff, this could be like a big W for them like long term, but we'll see. As no fair use laws. Yeah, I think they're a lot more strict than we are about that. Like I remember when this first the issue first started coming out, like people tried to say that Japan like didn't have copyright laws, which is like obviously retarded. But like we're dealing with Pocket Pair fanboys here, so like of course they're retarded. Like they wouldn't be Pocket Pair fans if they weren't. Like Palworld is gonna fail and gonna fail hard. Yep. Like again, like it's just a matter of Nintendo's already more hated than EA. Let's be real here. Like Nintendo is the most hated company in the industry because people cocksuck EA all the time. Like just look at what happened with the Dead Space remake, right? People ignore like the terrible things that Ubisoft, like Konami, Capcom, Square Enix do all the time. But like Nintendo does something perfectly justified, like take down a plagiarized product, and suddenly it's like some big like we have to like demonize them, right? And again, this isn't like an isolated incident. Like it happens all the time. My entire channel like revolves around pointing this out, right? The bad stuff Nintendo does. What does Nintendo do? What does Nintendo do that's bad? Like name one thing, like a single solitary thing that Nintendo does is bad. I have never seen anything that Nintendo has done that I would consider like to be a bad thing, ever. Unless you're like just weird, like unless you count like Reggie tweeting about like that Haitian guy who's like working on a Trump case, because that was pretty retarded. But like he's not working for Nintendo anymore, so it doesn't even matter. Fuck the liberal Haitian coat, by the way. That's like the stupidest thing in the world. Like, oh, look at this 1%er. That's not who the group of people we're talking about. You fucking retard. I also don't like those indie games that are just clones of 80s Japanese games. Like, I don't know. If you're talking about Blazing Chrome, that shit was awesome. I mean, there are good ones. Like, do you mean like literal clones or like the really, really good ones? Like, I don't know. I've played some good ones. But yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about. They do feel like a major step down of like from like the actual authentic thing that they're paying homage to. I mean, I'll defend like Blazing Chrome and stuff like that. I don't know. Should we look at 4chan and see if like they're still coping? Has the situation like evolved yet? I don't know. I should probably end the stream. I think I'm ready to call it quits. Weekly Famitsu scales. Wait, hang on. Pocketpair responds to Nintendo regarding the lawsuit. Pocketpair. Yesterday, a lawsuit was filed against our company for patent infringement. We have received notice of this lawsuit and will begin the appropriate legal proceedings and investigations into the claims of patent infringement. At this moment, we are unaware of the specific patents we are accused of infringing upon, and we have not been notified of such details. Really? Pocketpair is a small indie game company based in Tokyo. Like this is what I mean when I talk about like how they try and act like they're like the friendly indie scene, the company. Like I have never seen someone try to be so manipulative. Like this is like really shitty behavior that I wish like more people addressed. It's so manipulative. But Pocketpair is a small indie game company. Like you know those commercials where like the abused animals and like the sad music plays in the background. Like I kind of want to like I kind of want that for myself. Like yeah. Okay. Pocketpair is a small indie game company based in Tokyo. Yeah, one of the biggest cities in Japan. Our goal as a company has always been able to create fun games by plagiarizing other companies. We will continue to pursue this goal because we know that our games bring joy to millions of gamers around the world. Palworld was a surprise success this year, both for gamers and for us. We were blown away by the amazing response for the game and have been working hard to make it even better for our fans. We will continue improving Palworld and strive to create a game that our fans can be proud of. It is truly unfortunate that we will be forced to allocate significant time to matters unrelated to game development due to the lawsuit. So they're going to blame Nintendo for not putting out content fast enough? Like, sorry guys, Nintendo is suing us. Like, what? What is this letter? Like, they respond to, like, they are completely reliant on their fans to shill for them. Like, again, without their fanboys, they have nothing. Like, they really don't. Like, they're not going to win the legal battle, but they think if they get enough cocksuckers on board, like, they'll be able to, like, recover from this somehow. But, like, it just isn't going to work. However, we will do our utmost for our fans and to ensure that indie game developers are not hindered or discouraged from. Oh, okay, if you're doing deals with Sony, right, and Microsoft, you're not indie. Okay, like you're not indie if you have a publisher. Like if you're partnering with other studios, you are an established company at this point. Like you're not independent. Like anyway, we apologize to our fans and supporters for any worry or discomfort that this news has caused. As always, thank you for your continued support of Palworld and Pocketpair. Cringe. Yeah, I agree. I agree. More like pocket pair of balls, because I keep my balls in my pocket. I think Atlas should sue Nintendo for ripping off Megaton. Let's see. Nintendo's still. Yeah, everyone's just coping. Yeah, yeah. Oh, please. It was successful for all of 4 months, and then it sank like a rock and bled players like crazy. Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. Like 90% of the commenters on these posts are like fucking shills and parasites, and then out of nowhere you get like absolute like chads just coming in and demolishing the entire narrative without even really trying. It's crazy. Like I don't even keep up with the player count anymore. But last I checked, it's not getting like 60,000 players a daily. If Pocket Bear loses, which they most likely will, then it just means they'll be court ordered to shut the game down or possibly dissolve their assets. Yep, they are fucked. Japanese making fun of them for saying they're a small indie company. Oh, that's based. All those Japs in support of Nintendo. I agree with the Republicans. Japan deserves those two nukes, and how they deserve the Indians, Nigerians, and Kurds ruining their country. Okay. Uh, yeah. So the Japanese company gets another Japanese company. Uh, Nintendo has a stronger track. Yeah, I really don't see how Palworld is gonna win this. Like, I really don't think it can happen. Uh, no, no. Pokemon's like anyone who's saying Pokemon is going downhill is delusional. I've talked about this like over and over again, but it's uh it's a really solid IP. Like again, Like, crying about how it's going downhill isn't going to convince anybody. I think what's happened with this gen has solidified that it doesn't really matter how much people like cry about the games online. They're very popular and can't really be subverted. No other monster collecting game exists. Yeah, remember? Did you see that narrative they were coming out with? That like this lawsuit was about. Did I mention this? That this lawsuit was going to prevent other monster catching games from getting made. That Nintendo was trying to monopolize the industry, so like Pokemon didn't have to compete with anything. Like that's just like such a weird delusional conspiracy theory. It's so out of touch with reality. Okay. I don't know, man. I think I should probably call it quits. I think I addressed everything I wanted to address. Uh, let's see. Unless something else has come up, we'll probably just we'll probably see what like YouTubers respond to tomorrow night because I'll be covering this all weekend for sure. I am pissed. Like, again, the fact that I went live after my shift, yeah, that's not something I like doing, but we had to bring this up because this was this is a long time coming for sure. Okay, Game Freak strikes Palworld. 30 charges of plagiarism. Wait, hang on. Nintendo may just end up abandoned by their lawyers because they care more about their ratio of one cases. Like, what the fuck is this cope? Like, that's just unbelievable that people are like spouting this bullshit. Again, we can spend like sit here all day and just cover this, but um yeah, we're gonna call it quits for now. Okay, so we'll come back on tomorrow and we'll continue addressing the situation as it develops. I think tomorrow we'll probably focus on like the YouTuber damage control because I'm going after anybody who tries to shill for Power World at this stage, and I do mean anybody. So like, yeah, Discord, like hit me up, like anybody who tries speaking out about this. I do intend on being on like the forefront of this controversy. So like I do want to go up against Angry Joe. I do want to go up against Felicify. I do want to go up against like anybody who would dare try and deny reality. This is going to crazy. Yeah. Again, we're not even getting started. Like, let's be real. Like, this is I said this like several I think I said this several times, but like this is like the biggest situation this generation, I think. Like I think this is like a generation defining thing because like Pokemon has been like the IP that the industry has like rallied against the most. Like it started with like Let's Go, and it escalated with like Sword and Shield, and like with Scarlet and Violet, it just kind of it petered out a little bit, but it's not completely done. And like now we're seeing this weird Power World thing. Like I think after Power World collapses, after they shield it so hard, like they are not going to recover from this. So like with Pokemon like being unrestrained by like the conspiracy, like it's going to like do bigger and bigger numbers, and it's not going to be possible to like suppress it like they used to, right? Like it's just going to keep like growing and growing and growing. Like it's just not going to stop. Uh but yeah, like the situation is going to get worse, right? Like it's only just starting now. Even after the lawsuit concludes, right? Even after like Pocketpair like bends the knee and like really just gives Nintendo everything they're asking for, like there's going to be a lot of coping and seething for a long time, and it is going to be a riot. Thank you